Hello, my name is Emily. I'm from the Oakland History Center at the Oakland Public Library. Thank you for joining us tonight on Visions of Black Futurity with Babette Thomas. Tonight's program is part of our Fall History series, which we do every October. This is program number 5 of 6. So we have one last program coming up. It's an in-person event on Sunday, the 30th of October. It's the Haunted History Bike Ride. So if you want to join that, you should come to the main library, meet in front at 2 p.m. and then go on a ride to see Oakland's most haunted locations that are within biking distance of each other. It should be very fun, and you can wear your Halloween costume. But tonight we have with us Babette Thomas, who is a producer, artist, and PhD student at Yale University in the departments of African American and American Studies. In Babette's work, they explore how new media, especially sound media, can be used to tell Black history and Black stories in ways that are tangible, educational, and accessible. And in Oakland, we know Babette mostly through the podcast that she produced for SF MOMA. As part of their Raw Material podcast, the season was called Visions of Black Futurity. And she was there from 2021 to 22, and she's just wrapping up her time at SF MOMA. And yeah, welcome, Babette.
Hey, everyone. Okay, let's load this up. Thank you so much for coming to this session titled On Visions of Black Futurity. And thank you so much to Emily for asking me to speak and organizing this event series. I know Emily does work at the downtown 14th Street Library, but the Lakeview branch of the Oakland Library is where I spent many afternoons as a kid listening to story times. So it feels very special to be here and to be doing this talk. So again, my name is Babette Thomas. I'm a radio producer, artist, and researcher born and raised in Oakland, California. A bit about me and some of my work. I've worked on various podcasts that engage with themes of Black history and culture and music, shows like Object of Sound, Call and Response, Louder Than a Riot, and Unfinished Deep South. I'm also in my second year of a PhD program at Yale in African American and American Studies, where I study the history of Black radio programs in the US. So I'm always kind of straddling these worlds between academia and radio and trying to figure out how I can take the things that I study in my research and broadcast them to a broader public. So from like September 2021 to mid 2022, I was the podcaster in residence at SF MOMA's Raw Material podcast, which is what I'm here to talk with you about today. Every year, SF MOMA has a new podcaster in residence to make a season of a podcast about contemporary art. And this past year, it was me. So for the past year and a half or so, I produced season 7 of Raw Material. It's called Visions of Black Futurity. It's a season that takes a look at the history of the Black arts movement in the Bay Area. And throughout the season, we try to take lessons from this time period of the late 60s and early 70s in order to try to imagine a future utopia of Black art that exists outside of museums. Now, I want to stick with this thread of utopia for a second, because for me, radio has always been a project of fantasy, hoping and wishing that there's something else out there. And for me, the realm of out there is history, specifically Black history. When I first started out in radio about 6 or 7 years ago now, I was working and collaborating on a college radio publication called Now Hear This. I was one of a couple Black producers in the group, and I felt really supported, but also determined to make stories about Black history. But I also felt a bit untethered. In this group and in college classes, I was learning about radio history through people like Studs Terkel and Alan Lomax, pictured here. These are like the big radio greats that everybody learns about when they're studying radio, but I wasn't hearing much about anyone else. And I remember kind of toiling and thinking to myself, there has to be a lineage and history of Black radio producers in the US during the 20th century. There have to have been Black radio producers that have come before me. And indeed, there are.
Top of the morning to you, my friends. From the home of colorful old Beale Street, the place where the blues began in Memphis, Tennessee. In the heart of the rich Mississippi Delta, WDIA, 50,000 watts of goodwill, invites you to join us in asking the man upstairs to smile on us today and help us to satisfy that hankering to offer you the best in radio entertainment and service to the finest people in the world, our listeners. Now, what you bet?
There is a really rich history of Black radio producers, Black radio programs, and independent stations in the US. And that clip was from WDIA, which is the very first commercial Black radio station in the US to ever broadcast in 1948 from Memphis, Tennessee. Finding these clips in my own personal research completely sent me on this deep rabbit hole into the history of Black radio back when I was in college. And as I got deeper into this work, again, I thought to myself, there have to have been Black women who specifically engage in these practices of self-documenting. I know they're out there. And that's when I found Zora.
This song I'm going to sing is a line and rhythm, and I'm going to call it Mule on the Mount, though you can start with any verse you want and give it a name. And it's the most widely distributed work song in the United States. And it has innumerable verses and whatnot about everything under the sun. And it's a line and rhythm, though they sometimes sing it just sitting around the juke houses and doing any kind of work at all, chopping wood and in the lumber camps and everywhere you find this song. Nowhere you can't find parts of the song, Mule on the Mount.
Well, is it known as a sort of a consistent song as you hear it all over?
The tune is consistent, but the verses, you know, how things, every locality, you find some new verses everywhere.
I mean, does it have the same core of verses? Does it have Mule on the Mount wherever you hear it?
Well, there's some place I haven't heard that same verse, Mule on the Mount, but there's no place that I don't hear some of the same verses. Captain got a mule, mule on the mount, call him Jerry. Captain got a mule, mule on the mount, call him Jerry. Gonna ride him down, Lord, Lord, I'm ride him down. I got a woman, she shakes like jelly all over. I got a woman, she shakes like jelly all over. Her hips so broad.
What a lot of people might not know is that Zora Neale Hurston, the incredible polymath, anthropologist, and novelist, she actually made Alan Lomax's journey through the American South possible. She used her previous research and relationships to help him interview Black folks in the South in 1935, and also learned songs in the field that she would later sing back to her sociological peers, including Alan Lomax himself. From her notes, it seemed like Zora actually liked Alan, but I'm sure she didn't enjoy making less than half of what all of her peers made. I wouldn't call Zora exactly a good singer, whatever that means, but I think the way that she used her voice as an instrument to convey what she learned in her fieldwork, kind of oscillating between being an anthropologist and a performer, I think it's really genius and masterful. And you can find those rest of those recordings of her singing online at the Library of Congress. So you can begin to see how my practice is really based in hoping that something out there exists and then trying to find it through methods of archival research. And it's these lineages of Black documentarians and radio producers that I now research in my academic work at Yale. But before I hauled myself all the way across the country to New Haven for grad school, like so many other people during the pandemic, I had moved back home and was living in my childhood home back in East Oakland with my parents. I'm a third generation Oaklander and I don't know how to shut up about it. And while I was working as a reporter with member station KLW, the beat that I really focused on was the local arts and culture scene in the Bay Area. And I'm sure as many of you remember during the nationwide protests in 2020 in response to George Floyd's murder, downtown Oakland became covered in these murals on the plywood that businesses had used to cover up their storefronts. There was graffiti, other original works, and images of George Floyd's face that went up in the Bay and all over the country. And so I reported on these murals, how exactly they came about, how there were so many of them, and how communities throughout the country planned on preserving them. I think one of the biggest things I learned in this reporting is that, in my opinion, really exciting art usually happens in spaces outside of museums. And I learned from my time interning in museums in college that these institutions are usually always in the process of perpetually trying to catch up. From this reporting, I learned that art and Black protests go hand in hand. And these are some of the murals that I reported on. But again, I wondered, had it always been this way? When my aunt Demira Ahmad was a Black Panther in the late 60s in Oakland, what role did art play in Black political action? And sure enough, through speculation and searching through some online video archives, I found my answer in a woman named E.J. Montgomery.
They are all Black artists residing in the United States and in Northern California. This is a group of professional artists. Some are professional, some are self-taught, some have master's, even doctorate's degrees. Some are from the age of 19 through 79.
Is this the most ambitious showing of this kind that's ever been attempted?
Yes, in the United States. It's the first time that a Black Art Association has organized and set up their own art exhibit in a museum of this size in the United States.
What's the purpose of having this exhibit?
Well, just to show that Black artists do exist. Several months ago, I met an African who was in charge of art for his country, and he had been taken across the United States into all of the major museums and schools, and he had not been pointed out any works by any Black American artists. And we want the public to be aware that we exist. We want our own people to know that we are here and who we are.
What difference is there between Black art and any other kind of art?
Oh, I'm not sure that there really is a difference, except that the work has been created by Black people. Many of them now are looking to their heritage, which may be Africa, Jamaica, or just any Black countries in the world and their own communities for subject matter.
How long will the show be running?
The show will be running from Monday, October 7th through the 26th of October.
So, oh, it took me to the beginning of the slide. Sorry about that. There we go. So this is Evangeline E.J. Montgomery, and she is speaking at the first Black art exhibition organized by a Black arts organization to ever take place in the United States, right in Oakland. And she is lead curator and founder of the group that put on the exhibition called A1. I find that the West Coast usually doesn't get the credit that it deserves for institutionalized Black art in the US. I know that when I learned about the Black arts movement in school, it mostly focused on New York. And when we talk about great Black curators, most of them work at New York or LA institutions. But the Bay played a really significant role in pioneering an aesthetic of Black visual art that would later go on to influence the whole country. And part of that is thanks to EJ. EJ was a curator and Black arts advocate who was really active in the Bay during the late 60s and early 70s. And she is absolutely incredible. She is the star of season 7 of season 7 of Raw Material, Visions of Black Futurity. And when I was digging through this archive of videos, she was absolutely everywhere, making exhibitions with people like Betty Saar and Elizabeth Catlett, organizing politically oriented exhibitions while the Black Panther Party was being founded. It seems like EJ knew absolutely everyone and was navigating the racism of museum spaces by moving in and outside of them in hopes of ultimately creating spaces for Black folks to commune over art. EJ is also an incredible metallurgist and printmaker herself. When I pitched an idea for season 7 of Raw Material to SF MOMA, I knew it had to be about EJ. I knew that we would have so much to learn from her. in this present moment where it seems like every cultural industry is undergoing a new reckoning like every other week. The ultimate goal of this season was to find EJ, but it was also to get at a central question. What are the Black artistic spaces outside of museums that we dream of? So in the midst of all this research, I went to the Oakland History Room and the African American Library, both in downtown Oakland. And the amazing librarians, Emily Foster, Dorothy Lazard, and Sean Dickerson brought me out some materials. And this is where I really got a sense of the world that EJ had created around her. Through looking at exhibition catalogs, it almost felt like they had been left behind for someone like me to find them. Someone kind of like digging through the archives interested in this kind of work. I saw EJ's careful curatorial hand and labor at work. This is a pamphlet from that exhibition that I just played a clip from. And this is a section in the back called "A Collage of Black Voices Creating a Picture of What Black Art Is." So this is from 1968, and it has these quotes from Black artists, thinkers, and collaborators of EJ's describing what Black art means to them. And you can see all of these people creating kind of chorus or snapshot in time of the politics of Black art at the time. This is the kind of stuff that's like really hard to convey in a podcast, like these visual materials. So I'm like really excited to be talking about it with you right now. It's through looking at these materials that I learned that EJ was friends with Sarah Webster Fabio, which led me to speak to her daughter, Cheryl Fabio. This catalog also helped me see that EJ was friends with Ruth Waddy, who was a curator in LA, who was then herself friends with assemblage artist Noah Purifoy. And through scans of exhibition catalogs online, I found that EJ worked at the Rainbow Sign, which is a place where Bay Area artist Mildred Howard also frequented, who we interviewed later in the season. There are these webs of connections that were so interesting to me that I wanted to highlight in this season, in both the past and the present, to help us imagine a different future. I wanted to focus on the relationships and the ideas that flow between people and artists and that really make art making possible. So for every artist that we focused on who made work during the 20th century, I also wanted to bring in a Bay Area artist from the present. I always joke that selfishly, like radio is just a way for me to make friends and community. And I think interviewing Bay Area artists was really my favorite part of the series and just of radio making in general. I interviewed folks like Sage Stargate, Nappy Nina, Deatra Colbert, Dewey Crumpler, and Mildred Howard. I've loved Sage Stargate's work since I was like 18. I first saw it in the Somark show called The Black Woman is God in 2016. And now Sage is actually doing an MFA at Yale in New Haven and actually lives in my neighborhood. And in talking to Nappy Nina, who I hadn't met before the interview, I learned that our fathers were childhood best friends growing up in West Oakland. And when I talked to Mildred Howard, I found out that she knew the Black feminist scholars coming out of Berkeley in like the 70s and 80s that I now study in my PhD program. So in doing this series, I kept being surprised by how small and interconnected our worlds actually are. And when I first started this series, I wasn't really sure that I would actually meet EJ. It still feels pretty unbelievable that I've had the chance to talk with her. So during this series, I had a few Zoom calls with EJ. She's currently 92 and lives in a care facility in DC. And most communication with her, like emailing, happens through her best friend of 20 years, an incredible woman named Stephanie Neal. Stephanie visits EJ at the care facility once a week to take care of her laundry because once the facility messed up all of EJ's incredible knit suits. The first call I had with EJ was pretty rocky. It was over Zoom and she has Parkinson's, so sometimes her voice is a bit shaky. She was in a common room where there was lots of noise in the background and it was really hard to hear her. And she also wasn't in the greatest mood because she didn't love her outfit that day, which I can completely understand because a slightly off outfit can also throw off my entire day. Stephanie is also an amazing storyteller and she paints a picture of EJ's life that really helps me understand who she is beyond what I've learned about her from the archive. EJ loves her clothes, her food, her art. She's really like a ladies' lady, and she still talks about some of her long lost loves. She's a woman of the world, and she misses being able to go on trips on her own, and she's often convincing her friends to pick her up and take her to the beach. One time, EJ was a bit confused about where she was. She swore she was at the beach, so she called Stephanie. Stephanie told her to look at the art in her room and try to figure out where she was. EJ describing her hanging up in frames on the wall. It turns out she had been in her own room at the care facility the whole time. After a time working in the Bay Area, EJ eventually moved to DC to work for the State Department to send Black artists overseas. She's traveled to a number of countries in Africa. She eventually gets divorced from her husband. She doesn't have kids, but she never stops opening doors for Black artists. I'm actually not going to play this clip right now. So a couple months ago, I actually went down to visit EJ in person for the first time. It had been a rough few months for her. She had battled COVID for the second time at 92, and she had lost dear friends and collaborators, Samela Lewis and Sam Gilliam. When I arrived, she was surrounded by her friends who she knew from her work at the State Department: Susan, Catherine, and of course, Stephanie. They're a tribe of people who care for her and try to visit her as often as they can. At one point, she leaned over to me and whispered, "I chose all of these people, even if they don't know it." And I think she was referring to the fact that she had gotten all of these folks their jobs at the State Department and had selected them for various positions. EJ is so sweet and caring, as well as hilarious. She kept asking me if I was comfortable, but if you say something that she doesn't like, she's also just not afraid to glare at you and let you know that she didn't like what you said. So here's a sweet clip of us interacting.
I know, sorry, EJ. You're doing great. Are you thirsty? You want any water?
I'm all right.
Okay.
What'd you say?
I said, I'm all right if you're all right.
I'm all right too.
Okay.
Thank you for asking, EJ.
Something that was really surprising to me, even though I'd heard it from Stephanie, is that EJ really loves to eat. Please do not be fooled by her small stature. This woman can easily put away a 4-course Italian meal. She reminds me so much of people in my own family who like to engage in beauty and pleasure in all different parts of their lives. EJ and I kind of bonded over both growing up as only children. And when I was sitting with her, I asked her how she had managed to do what she did. That was my main question. How did she become so confident to organize people despite being kind of shy? She told me that she grew up the daughter of a Baptist minister that really knew how to bring people together, and that she was surrounded by Black artists who would come to town to visit on the East Coast and stay in her parents' house. She talked about how growing up, she was the only young Black girl in her neighborhood, and that made her unafraid to talk to pretty much anybody. She had no choice, and she also just didn't really think anything of it.
But anyway, I'll let you get back to it.
But anyway,
Well, I was just gonna ask you, EJ, because it seems like you were just so good at connecting with people and just not being afraid to go up and talk to people. How did you learn how to do that? How did you learn how to not be I get nervous going up and talking to new people. Would you just kind of do it? Would you just go up to people and say I'm an artist and this is what I'm, and I feel the fact that you were a curator and also an artist kind of helped because you could connect with artists. But how did you learn how to do that? How were you not afraid to just approach people?
I just wasn't afraid. I didn't think that I was any different from from other people. I guess I learned that when I was quite young. My father was a minister of a Baptist church, Black Baptist church. So, and he was always moving from place to place. Belonged to something called Mission Society or something or other. And he would get appointments through them for small churches in communities. And, he would take the whole church and make them into a choir and take them up to the nearest town to perform a Sunday church for them. So
that's kind of curatorial. That's kind of curatorial. It's just gathering people together,
Yeah. And I was the only Black child in my age group in Worcester at the time.
But that's true about EJ, with her personality or her essence is so, people just, you have this, they gravitate to her.
People want to talk to you, it sounded like, too.
I mean, like, we'll go to an opening or people will come up to her and she's very cool, not cold, but just, you allow, I think you allow people to kind of be themselves and not, you don't have an agenda, you do in the sense of you want to move things forward, but she's got this unique quality to her. It's just kind of magic, I guess.
Yeah.
I think EJ is, actually, I'm gonna head back to this slide. I think EJ is far too humble. She's talked to me about how she wishes she could have done more, but I literally don't think that would have been possible. In creating this series, I kind of resonate with EJ's sentiment of just talking to people. Like I said earlier, some of the people that I interviewed in this series are artists that I've seen in books and exhibitions, and I'm like, wow, there's absolutely no way that I can ever talk to them. I think internet culture kind of perpetuates this thing where we see people on Instagram and it makes them like simultaneously really relatable, but also kind of untouchable. But when EJ was doing her earlier curatorial work, obviously there was no internet. So you just had to talk to people and connect them with other people. It's just what you did, and EJ mastered it. I have many, many takeaways from this series, but I think that's the one of the lessons that I'm focusing on right now. That this project really started from me admiring EJ's work from afar. I think because I grew up on the internet, like more specifically on Tumblr within like the early 2010s, I kind of have like a tendency to like stan people or just like be a fan from like far away. And it's something that I've been like somewhat embarrassed about in the past. Like I can just get really excited about the ideas of people and things that I don't necessarily know firsthand, especially like figures throughout history. And while it's something that I definitely have to keep in check, this whole project was me just being really enamored by artists that are from the place that I grew up. I kind of leaned into my standing and my admiration, and this is what emerged. So I urge you to not be afraid to reach out and connect with the people that you admire from afar, especially in a place like Oakland and the Bay Area, which is really like a hub for collaboration. If I've learned something from EJ and this season, it's that that's often how artistic collaboration and mutually beneficial and meaningful relationships can happen. I feel so lucky to know EJ, to continue to get to know her, and to be able to commune with elders and artists and people I so deeply admire for this podcast. In so many ways, this project feels like such a dream come true. In doing this work with raw material, I've also learned that I don't know if any art world or creative scene out there is perfect, free of systems of power and domination, but I think it's in the striving to create something new, different, and unheard of that the magic usually happens. I am so incredibly grateful to the team at SF MOMA for allowing me to dream with them this season. They pushed me, supported me, but also gave me the freedom and platform to create something that I don't really think could exist anywhere else in the radio world. So I want to give a huge thank you to them and take a moment to give them their flowers. This show would not have been possible without the work of Maisa Plante-Graham, Erica Gangsey, Santino Gonzalez, and Kevin Carr. And the incredible art for this season, like all of these images here, is by Gina Penn, who is a local Bay Area artist who is so amazing and does kind of work with these like archival photographs and like remixing them. It's all really, really beautiful. And I'm so happy with how it all turned out. So thank you so much for all, like listening. I really appreciate it. And you can stream my season and other seasons of raw material wherever you like to listen to podcasts. So I think I'm wrapping a little earlier than I thought, but thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Babette. We can take questions if people want to like virtually raise their hand or just unmute if no one's talking. You can. Oh, someone has a question here. Go ahead, Obina.
Hi, hi, Babette. Thank you for sharing your presentation. It was very inspiring to see that, just being able to see your inspiration for media and podcasts. I wanted to ask you, as you're studying at Yale, what is like your passion behind, like, what do you want to do with this as far as like in the community? How do you want to make change in your community, like specifically in your own community?
Sorry, it broke up for a second. I think it was my internet. Was the end of the question like what I'm interested in doing in my own community, like with my work at Yale?
Oh, sorry, I probably have bad Wi-Fi. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. Mine's also bad. It's okay.
Okay. So I was saying, first of all, I want to say thank you for, sharing that presentation. I wanted to ask you, what's your passion and as far as like, what do you want to do in your community to make change? What do you want to do who do you want to inspire, and how do you want to make change in your community?
Yeah, I think like what I'm really interested in is, I think like so much of like the radio work and podcasting that's out there right now is just so much about like pushing out the next product. Like I've worked on a number of like weekly shows, and like it is just like such a tight grind and deadline. It's just like pushing out thing after thing after thing. And the lovely thing about SF MOMA was that like I had just like weeks, if not months, to like craft every episode. And so in terms of like radio and how it works in my community, I'm really interested in this kind of like slow model of like radio, like kind of slow, like community centered radio. And the work that kind of ties in at Yale is like Black folks have been doing this throughout the 20th century, right? Like Black radio, especially like in the American South during the Civil Rights Movement, was essential to Black organizing, and it was essential to reach Black folks like who were experiencing the precarity, the state-induced violence and of segregation in the American South. And so I think my work, like my PhD work, is really just about like treating that and the history of Black radio as like an art form and something to deeply learn from. And so like learning the tactics and like the poetics and the techniques that Black folks have used to use radio as a medium to reach their community. And in terms of how I want to do that in my radio work, like I'm just really interested in creating this work that speaks directly to Black folks and that could actually maybe help in like organizing efforts. So I know like I did work when I was like documenting some of the murals in downtown Oakland. It was like, I guess I'd heard from folks that it was helpful to know like who to contact if they wanted to preserve a mural, for example, or if they wanted to preserve some of their own artwork, because that was like a really big challenge. I think it was like once the murals were up, like figuring out like which mural belonged to like which artist, so they didn't tag them and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm really just in this place of learning, like wanting to learn from my artistic predecessors to try and create work that continually like speaks to the communities that I care about the most. Oh, Emily, I think you're muted.
Oh, anyone else have a question?
I think Morgan asked one here. It says,
oh, okay.
When speaking to EJ, did she ever reference her own posterity and her reflections, or mention that it felt like what it felt like to experience herself as a subject in the archive? Yeah, I kind of asked her how she felt. And actually, you know what? Maybe I'll actually play that clip. I was hesitating to play it, but I think she kind of feels weird about it. Like I think she like looks back, and I think it's tough because she still does so much, but she obviously is just like not able to be quite as active and involved as she used to be. And so I think she looks back and sometimes just feels like a little, like she's just like confused. Like I told her, I was like, yeah, EJ, I've been researching you for like a year. And she was like, why? Like she was just like, I don't understand, which I feel like is how everybody feels like, oh, I'm not doing anything special, but I'm just like, oh my God, you're amazing. And but I think like if someone made a whole podcast about me, like I'd be probably kind of uncomfortable. Like I think she just knows that like this is like where like I really do like I really am just like a stan. Like I'm just like a fangirl, and I just made an entire podcast about a person that I admired. I actually am gonna play this clip really quick if people don't mind. It's a bit longer, so I was refraining from playing it, but since we have a little bit of time, I feel like maybe this kind of answers that question well.
people my age know who you are, like 20-year-olds. Yeah. How does that feel? What are you thinking?
I don't know. I've had mixed emotions about me. And I'm trying to put together my life.
Yeah.
What's really been important or not important. I don't know.
What are the mixed emotions that you're feeling? Do you think you could explain what you're feeling?
Well, I don't know. I guess sometimes I wish you had done more.
You wish you had done more, EJ?
Yeah.
How could you have done more? How could it have been possible? I can't believe you feel that.
I do. Yeah. I didn't move ahead like I thought I should. And
I mean, do you also feel proud, though, of all the things you've done?
Yeah.
You do? Yeah. Because, I mean, when I look at your work, I think this woman is incredible. I have to know her. I've never seen anyone doing work like this before. So that's how I felt when I encountered your work. I was like, who is this person that was crafting all of these spaces for artists, right? My Aunt Demira, my aunt who passed away, she was in the Black Panther Party. So she would have been organizing and working probably at the same time that you were working, around like 68, right? Cultivating those exhibitions. So, I mean, I'm very proud of you and happy to be able to meet you. Yeah. I'm surprised to hear you say that you have mixed feelings. I'm surprised by that.
yeah.
Yeah.
I guess all the people that I meet, I sort of sit and watch them and get ideas. I want to help them with some of their ideas, and I can't really open that door a lot of times.
You feel like right now you can't open that door?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that must be hard. That must be a hard feeling. Especially because you've opened so many doors for so many people. You feel like you want to keep doing that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you feel like now being in this care center, you're not really able to do that as much anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you feel like are the kinds of connections you're looking to make now? Like, do you want to meet younger artists? Do you want to meet, like, what are the kind of people, what are the kind of things that you want to do?
I want to meet younger artists, I think.
Yeah.
What they're doing, what they want to do.
Yeah.
And, well, just in recent months, 2 people have
Yeah, so I feel like that clip does like a good job of maybe describing like some of her mixed feelings about kind of reflecting on her past and her life and her work. Yeah.
I'd like to ask a question while everyone else is thinking of their questions. How do you think about archiving your own work? Like, as someone who likes to do research in archives and study other people's work, I feel like you probably have thought about where your work is going to end up and how that's going to happen. And how do you think about that?
You know, that's something that I'm actually interested in my research, because if you look at the history of Black radio, it's so poorly archived, and that's part of like the piecing together in my work that I'm doing, right? Like some of these sound reels are in people's like hot southern like attics, like for some of the stations that I'm looking at, and so like digitization, like it just takes a lot of money, a lot of coordination, a lot of effort. And so I actually haven't thought too much about how I like would want my own work to be archived. I think I'm really fascinated with how things are presented like digitally. I think that's what I'm really interested in. So with this show, I think I also tried to have kind of like a digital presence where it was like maybe there's like a playlist. Like I'm kind of interested in things existing across platforms. So if one of them fails, then maybe there's a chance of my like work surviving. But I think I'm really interested in like kind of digital archiving and preservation for like podcasting. I'm just a bit skeptical of it because I know that web archiving is actually harder to keep up with than like physical materials. Like it's kind of like yeah, like things existing on the web are like constantly like they're almost pushing themselves out of existence. Like it's just always like you know, like corrupted files and everything like that. So but I am really interested in like digital archiving and kind of like multimedia like kind of worlds like on the internet.
Great, thanks. And I wonder if you've thought about like making a print version that does go into a physical archive, like turn it into a book. I feel like multiple formats is always good, but just throwing that out there. So there's a question from Shiraz. They say they really appreciate you sharing E.J. Montgomery's thoughts with us. Their question is, have you encountered existing spaces that are potentially more futuristic or more accommodating to Black artists than cultural institutions or museums? Does the internet help us imagine these alternate spaces?
Yeah, I mean, I think the internet totally helps us imagine these spaces. Like I'm just like very biased towards the work of like Black women. And like, I think like in the podcast, I talk about how the way that I kind of came to be interested in contemporary art was like through kind of like the art ho movement on like Tumblr within the 2010s, which was just like these like folks from like different parts of like mostly the US, like these Black like artists like sharing their like kind of, now looking back on it, like maybe slightly silly like art, like them like photoshopped over like a Van Gogh painting or something like on the internet. But I just thought that was like the coolest thing. And like I still think like it is such an interesting like web of sociality, like the way that those like kind of early Tumblr like people were engaging and kind of like yeah, the kind of like circuits that formed and like people sharing each other's art. And so I'm still like, I still think that's like some of the most exciting stuff. Like I'm not on Tumblr anymore, but like for me, like that was just like so incredibly interesting. And I think, I mean, I don't know, Instagram seems like a little bit of like a doomscape for art, but I do think there's like a lot of like potential in the internet. In terms of like in the Bay Area, I think the places that honestly inspire me the most are just like galleries by like Black women. Like there are just like so many, like there are so many like Black women like gallery owners. I mean, there's not so many, but there's like a few in like downtown Oakland whose work just feels like so incredibly like ahead of its time and have been doing this work for so long. And I think like that's what those are the spaces that honestly really inspire me. And kind of, I think like, yeah, maybe some of like the smaller galleries in the Bay Area are what really excite me. I guess those are still cultural institutions, but yeah, I think I'm very excited by like kind of like the small, like Part 2 gallery, Joyce Garner Gallery downtown. Like, I just think like some of those spaces are very special and excited, like doing some more exciting work.
Okay, there's another question here from Ariel. They ask, when speaking with EJ, did she explain her process for curation? with so much talent, how did she identify what's important, culturally important for exhibition?
That's such a good question. I think, I think a lot of it, I think she liked to exhibit a lot of like kind of early career Black artists. Like I think especially when she was sending folks over to different countries when she was like in the State Department. Um, we honestly like didn't get like so much into like the specific. I think it's like it was a bit harder for EJ sometimes to remember like really specific like shows and I mean she has an incredible memory, but I think it would be a lot to like have her kind of like think through like, oh, why did you choose like this specific person? And I think she was more just like really interested in like I'm sure she had a process, but I think she was also just like whatever the moment like required. And so I think like in that 68 exhibition, like part of it was there was this kind of the same issues of like police violence that we're experiencing today. Similar things were happening in 68 in Oakland, which is why there was also the founding of the Black Panther Party in like 66 in response to it. And so I think like she engaged with artists like Ben Hazard, for example, whose work was like addressing the like police violence and police brutality. And so, yeah, I think she was just like very like socially conscious and engaged. I don't know quite as much about like her curatorial process, but I think like some of the exhibitions I looked at, it was just like very attuned to like the social and like political moment. Her Rainbow Sign Show with Elizabeth Catlett, and then the later one with Betty Saar, that was all about like Black heroes. And kind of that's where the liberation of Aunt Jemima was first exhibited, which is like a kind of seminal work by Betty Saar. And that was right at the cusp of kind of like the Black feminist movement. So there's just like all of this work where like EJ just seemed like right on time to what was happening in the world and to like what was important to Black folks at the time.
I have another question. You mentioned that EJ is also an artist, and I wonder if there's any place where people can see some of her work online or elsewhere.
Yes, so there is, I should maybe I can find the link for it really quickly and send it out. But yes, so EJ is an amazing printmaker. A lot of her work is inspired by nature, like on the California coast. Like she loves like Monterey and like the monarchs, and like she's just like, I think like in the last episode of the series, like she describes just like the inspiration for some of her work. So her work is online. There's this kind of like printmaker, women in printmaking series where like there's a video of her doing some of her prints. So if you just look up like Evangeline Montgomery printmaking online, you can find some of her prints. She also has these really cool like metal boxes. And yeah, I guess also just to put the question again of like community and like what radio can do. So like the Oakland Museum had some of her boxes, like the metal boxes, because she used to work at the Oakland Museum for like decades and have been like trying to get in contact with her, but it's kind of tough to get in contact with her. Like I called a lot of phone numbers. And so the curator from the Oakland Museum actually reached out to me being like, does EJ like want her boxes back? Like we've been trying to get in contact with her. And so, yeah, if you look up, I think like on the Oakland Museum website, there might be images of some of her, I think they're called like ancestral boxes. I think inspired by her mother. And yeah, her work is so cool. She went to California, like Academy of like the Arts and just like got really into like metallurgy and like printmaking. So yeah, you can find some of her work online.
Well, thanks. I'll give other people another minute to think of questions, but I'll ask you another one. Well, everyone else is being quiet. So you talked about the oral history work in the historical section about that Zora Neale Hurston and Alan Lomax worked on. And I wondered, was that ever actually on the radio, or was it recorded just and released? I know it was released on albums, right?
Yeah, it was released on albums and kind of like through like the Library of Congress. Like I think like kind of like I feel like they're like Library of Congress still releases like Folkways albums or whatever, like meant to like document America. And so no, I don't think that work was ever on the radio. I think that was more just about like taking a snapshot of a changing America in like 1935, and these folks like kind of like posts like emancipation like generation, like what that looked like. So yeah, I think that was more of like an archival, like I think they were sent out for like a works progress administration, like WPA project to kind of document America. So I think it was more about like preservation, like for like the Library of Congress. So
cool. Okay, well, it looks like maybe no one has any more questions. So do you want to say anything to wrap up? Or
just thank you guys so much for coming. I really appreciate it. And yeah, please reach out to me if you have any other questions or just want to talk about Black art. I'm gonna put my email in the chat, and I just really appreciate it. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. We really enjoyed it. And yeah, everyone have a great night. Thanks a lot for coming.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.